Let's move back a little bit to to some of our basic assumptions. In the true law of free monarchies, King James I, a century before all this, argued that really, for the best sort of government, only a monarch, responsible only to God, could guarantee the liberties of all the people. That the idea of government from the people was simply a recipe for disaster and chaos. What argument would you make that he was right or wrong?
Well, this argument comes from Plato's idea of the philosopher king, in which the ideal republic or the ideal state has one ruler that has all the citizens in mind, that philosophically examines his government and does everything out of interest for his citizens. And I believe while this is an idealistic way to have a government, it is not a realistic way to impose an actual government, because we see that there are people in charge do carry out things for their own interest, and we can see that although this would be ideal if the king or the monarch would have everyone in his interest, we see that we can't depend on that, so we need to have these checks and balances. We can't have this much single power.
And at the time the framers were forming the new government and writing the Constitution, this wouldn't have been practical, because many came to the United States for freedom of religion, to get away from that in Europe. And having had experience with that monarchical form of government, I don't think the founders would have considered that a good way to execute their new government.
So help us understand, Madison's Virginia plan was essentially a parliamentary form, which is what the founders had experienced in England. Monarchy had long since been shoved aside. Why the resistance to a parliamentary form of government in the United States?
There's resistance towards a parliamentary form of government, not an actual practical application, but just or the functionings of the parliament, but the ideal of a parliament. The Declaration of Independence was basically written as a laundry list against the abuses of parliament.
And why? What did the Declaration do? And again, we want to tie it back to Rome if we can. Why is the Declaration so important in explaining why we shifted from a parliamentary to a different form? What happened to sovereignty, and where was sovereignty in the Roman Republic?
Well, we can see that while both a parliamentary system and a republic are two efficient ways to govern, we can see in the Roman system that the assemblies in the republic did derive more of its power from the body of citizens, whereas a parliamentary system would not draw as much power from the citizens. So I believe that the founders found that more appealing to them because they had just been usurped by a parliamentary system.
The sovereignty rests within the people, and we can see this, the idea that the justifications made, they used this Declaration of Independence to justify why they were declaring independence. It's the body's list of grievances against it, and they use this justification not only for military backing from, say, France, but they use it in order to justify why they were doing this and what they needed to do it for. They use these, in the preamble, they talk about the idea of the social contract and the consent of the governed, and how we must look at the idea of the consent of the governed, and the popular sovereignty relies in the people.
So is that going back to a Roman principle, or is that doing something radically new? To just keep tying us into our question.
The consent of, are you talking about the consent of the governed?
The radical shift to popular sovereignty in the United States.
The Roman Republic began to stagnate when it stopped representing, and it started, as Rome was expanding.
Finish your sentence.
As Rome was expanding, the classical Republican ideals wouldn't function on such a diverse level. It functions best, as Aristotle writes, in a small, homogeneous community that Rome or the United States just couldn't realistically uphold.
Great. Thank you very much. So it's over, but we still have to give you some feedback. Would you like to start?
Sure. Very well argued and very well presented. When you talk about just a couple of details, you talked about the fall of Rome. It was unclear whether you were talking about the fall of the Roman Republic with the emergence of Julius Caesar and Augustus, or the fall of the empire. Of course, the Republic collapses into an empire at a time when Rome's power is at its greatest. So that's an important distinction that I think I know what you were saying. I just wish you'd said we could understand that much more clearly. But you made a great many very important points. I liked your reference to, your important reference to Marius, who, in the establishment of standing army. That was something that the founders were very concerned about. Standing armies cause trouble, and they would have, they certainly looked to Marius as certainly a warning to them. So I enjoyed our conversation a great deal.
When you come back from lunch, you sort of come back with a different approach because you have to sort of get the day started. And this is there's so much energy coming out of this, the four of you. I think you really know the materials, and what I like is you use some very small nuances to distinguish different parts of history. I like the way you start all the way back in with the role of the city-states in Athens and mob rule. I was trying to get to that. I just didn't get there. I think you covered the history very well. We try to throw you a little bit off, and then you come back to why Rome was relevant in creating these checks and balances system we have. So I think it's well done.
I agree. I thought you did a terrific job. If I have any criticism, it may be that you maybe tried to do too much so that we didn't have a chance to really follow up or for you to establish your points. We could have asked you about the definition of oligarchy and aristocracy, for example, because we may have different opinions about that. You didn't have an opportunity to pursue these notions of virtue, civility, collegiality, which were the earmarks of the Roman Republic. Are those earmarks of the American Republic, or were the founders saying we can build a great republic without them? We don't need that dependence. We didn't have a chance to get into it with you about class representation in government, which was apparently significant to Rome, but maybe not to the founding fathers. So it's just a suggestion that maybe sometimes doing so much can make it impossible or difficult to have the really terrific conversations that this material lends itself to. But that said, your grasp of history, your knowledge of this material is admirable. We really appreciate it, and thanks for getting our afternoon off to such a great start.
Thank you.
Thank you.